Hey everybody, it's Stephen Brooke and welcome to Architectural Photography and Composition. I want to talk about a tricky subject right now, and that is dealing with people in your architectural photographs. Now, back in the 50s and in the 60s, architectural photographs often had people in there for scale, and that was pretty common. And if you look in magazines like Architectural Record and Architectural Forum, Progressive Architecture, you'll see, especially in the black and white imagery, you'll see people used throughout. Like here in Mark Hampton, architect, this is a photograph of a project of his in Sarasota area in 1962. Now, a lot of architectural photographs in shelter magazines from that era, they kind of looked like car ads and furniture ads. The people were posed in kind of stylized way. The hairstyles and the clothing and all really date these images. So it was considered, if you could avoid it and not have people in your shots, you could create a more timeless image because you wouldn't have hairstyles and clothing styles and colors to date your images. What I want to emphasize though is that even if you are including people in your photographs, you're still an architectural photographer. And that means that all the considerations that we have gone through still hold. Precise time of day for best shadow and lighting control, thoughtful composition, properly proportioned, taking everything out of your image that isn't compositional. And I want you to please keep in mind, at our best, we are equal partners in a 600-plus-year-old tradition that is characterized by a kind of uncompromising excellence. And I know that there are fads in architectural photography where you just show up anytime and you don't use a tripod, the skies are blown out, the windows are blown out. If there are people, they're sort of anywhere. I want to encourage you to not do your work that way. I think, in my opinion, it's artless, and I think in a couple of years it's just simply going to look bad. So remember, even when there are people in your photos, you are still an architectural photographer. Now, unless the image is a real portrait, and here's an image, painting by Frans Hals or John Everett Millais or John Singer Sargent, unless it's a definite portrait where your eye is meant to fix on the subject of the portrait, the architecture has to have equal dominance. So the viewer's eye, because you're a human being, if there are people in your image, your eye goes to the people, can't help it. So if you are going to include people in your architectural photography, the people and the architecture have to be balanced. So the main reasons for having people in your shot, one is to show the use of space. And this is important in places like medical facilities, or to establish scale. And this is important in really large scale installations where you want to have a person or two there just to give you a sense of scale. And if you'll think back to what we did with when we looked at the Dutch paintings and engravings, unlike church-oriented paintings, the people in Dutch paintings and engravings they weren't that important. They were there for scale, but we didn't know who they were, and we didn't care who they were. So the first thing you really need to do is to ask your client if they want people in their photos. This is really important. Don't assume that they want them in there, and don't assume that they don't. If they don't want people, timing is really critical, because you're going to have to shoot at times of day when, let's say, in an office there's nobody there. This will require some timing. Now, if they do want people, that's another whole situation for you, and you're going to have to coordinate it with staff. You're going to have to find people and get their unhesitating cooperation to sit in places, not to move around. Either one can be a chore, but you need to know from the very beginning of your session, whether or not you want people in your shots. Now, here are the basics for this. Number one, placement is obviously critical in the overall composition, just as if, excuse me for saying it, just as if they were a piece of furniture or a tree or a bush or a plant, something. They are part of the overall composition. Number 2, if possible, compose your image first and then place the people in the shot. Now, if that's not possible, for example, in this shot at Seaside, set your photograph up and then kind of imagine where you want them to be, and then be patient and wait for them either to walk into just that spot, or in this case to ride their bicycles right into that spot. Now, your viewer's eye is going to naturally go to the people, so you need to use that as part of your overall compositional dynamic, and we'll get into this. There are a couple of things I want you to avoid. Avoid blurry figures. Again, this was popular for some reason for a while. In art museums, you'd see somebody blurry going by. Your eye, the viewer's eye, is going to go right to that blurry image, and it's going to take away from the overall dynamic of your picture. Number 2, if you can, avoid people or orangutans looking off frame, because what that does, that takes your viewer's eye off frame. And if you have, we're going to go into all of these, if you have small groups, try to establish a narrative axis to give a sense of direction to the image. And then we're going to look at what happens if you have crowds, which are uncontrollable, how you can establish them, try to establish them within one zone. So let's look at all of these. 3 basic situations where the people are important. Again, they're important, but it's not a portrait. Number 2, small groups of people. And number 3, crowds. So the first one, when the people are important, but the architecture is of equal importance. And there's a painting type that shows this exactly, and that's if you look at an Annunciation painting, because it shows Mary and the angel, but always within an architectural framework. So here, the subjects are important, but the architecture is of equal importance. Again, this is not a portrait. We're not looking just at them. We're looking at a whole scene. So in Filippo Lippi's Annunciation, 1443, you see the figures are in here, they're around the side, but the architecture is also very important. Now, the position of the people, that's really key, and you have to think about that when you set your photo up. We've looked at this painting by Titian before in Venice, and the presentation of the Virgin at the Temple, and this is a 369 composition, and you can see that she is right here in the middle of where the 6 and the 6 are. In other words, 2/3 of the way down, 2/3 of the way in. Here she is right here. Again, if you can, compose your image first and then place the people. So this is a portrait that I did of Robert and Darrell Davis, who were the founders of Seaside, the new town in the Florida Panhandle. Now, even though it's a portrait, I have placed them within the architectural framework, and I've done a couple of things here. One, I've shown the town back here. That was why we were doing this, because this is a town they were developing, and also the kind of architecture that they were promoting at Seaside. So instead of this being a tight little portrait of just them and their 2 dogs, I have placed them within this architectural framework to show the building, to show the town in the background, and place them within this entire architectural framework. Very important. Now, small groups of people, compose your image and pre-visualize, if you can, where you would like the people to be. What's important is if you can establish a narrative axis, like in Vermeer's Officer and a Laughing Girl. And here's the narrative axis. He's looking at her, she's looking at him. And what this does is it takes 2 individual people and it makes them a unified group, so that this unified group is in contrast to the rest of the architecture, rather than the architecture and 2 separate people. That axis is really compositionally important. De Hoek does this in his village. Here's this little group over here. Here's this woman looking this way, looking off here. Here's the trees moving you back, the darkened sky. So he establishes this little rhythm because he has these narrative axes of his people. we've looked at this painting as well, Hopper's Nighthawks in 1942. And what I would like for you to look at, which we haven't looked at before, is the percentage of the overall painting that's devoted to the people versus how much of it is devoted to the architecture. And what this painting is all about, besides the kind of loneliness that he's depicting here, and he does that with these axes, is he's also showing you this kind of chilling atmosphere that happens in rare times of day when the light is really haunting. And you can see he's chosen a kind of blue-green palette, which is not, those aren't particularly happy colors to the human eye. And so he's showing this kind of lonely environment, and these actors are within the walls of this painting. So they are very precisely placed, but this is not just about them. It is really about the architecture, the city, and the actors in his painting. So here's a photograph that I took at a library, and I have two axes here which develop my dynamic. First of all, I've opened this chair to the viewer, and my first axis is really between where your eye goes to this first person sitting here at the table. So that gets you in. And then back here, I have two people, like in the Vermeer, they are looking at one another. And so your eye doesn't go off frame, I have arranged my verticals appropriately. So here is my dynamic. It is clearly a clockwise dynamic. You're meant to go here, come up here, the beams hold you in. Here's this little narrative axis here, and the verticals down here. And I keep you within the frame of my photograph. And I want you to keep looking at the photo. Keep the subjects looking into the frame, because if they're looking into the frame, your viewer is going to look into the frame. Here she's here looking at her book here, he's looking down at his book here. So it keeps everybody within the frame of the photograph. Now, if the subject is looking off frame, you need to have a vertical to stop the eye. Now, in this Hopper painting, he's looking at his newspaper. She's playing the piano with one finger, which is this is really being idle and boring if you're sitting there plunking the piano keys with one finger. But so that your eye does not wander off, he has the vertical of the spinet and some of the music here to turn your eye back this way. So with this photograph of Carl Abbott's house in Sarasota, we have his two boys sitting here for scale. And they're looking off frame, but I have one tree and then a big tree to keep you from moving off frame. They're looking, you go here, you come in, here's a little entrance. That's what we looked at with Cezanne in his landscapes. You give your viewer an entrance in, you turn the corner, you see the building, this angles down this way, they're looking this way, and the trees bring you back into the overall shot. Now this is a movie set, movie Step Up 4, and this goes the other way. Here's the camera, and your eye is going to go to the camera. His elbow and arm are pointing this way. Here's the lighting designer looking way off frame, but I've got this big heavy, I don't know what the hell that was, going this way. And then here's the sound guy who takes your eye back down. So here I have a counterclockwise dynamic going on. Camera to the subject, to the lighting guy, to that thing, moving down. So even though there are three people in here, the architecture of the room, that's really what I wanted to show as well. They are all counterbalanced. Now, if you'd like a deep dive on using verticals to establish compositional order, take a look at vertical power using the compositional strength of border verticals in architectural photos. It's another video that I have that I think will really help you in understanding how to use what the French call repoussoir elements, vertical elements to give order and stability. Now, this situation, sort of uncontrollable, compose first and then wait for the right arrangement of people. So these guys are here, they're not in the way, these guys are up here, there's another little group here. So there's kind of a clockwise dynamic going on. The only guy that I could deal with was the architect who was involved with the set design. That's my friend Carlos Menendez, and Carlos is standing there. I said, Carlos, just stand there. I need you to anchor this photograph. And so I waited for these guys to move, because these guys are doing work. They're not going to wait around for some photographer to tell them, you go over here. They're not going to do it. If you're in a situation on a streetscape, it is always better to have the people walking into the frame rather than walking out, because your viewer is going to follow them along into the frame rather than coming off frame. Here at the Miami International Airport, I've got my people all confined within one area. I mean, I didn't put them there. I arranged this photo knowing I'm going to have people there, because this is customs and they're not going to shut down for architectural photo. But I've got a line going in and they're compositional. And then what I waited for here was one little group over here, because if I had everybody over here, I got this empty zone, and I waited for a little group to gather. So I have these guys coming in, there's a little group, and then going off. But note that they are all contained within this one little area, and that gives it some compositional stability. Here's another example up at Seaside. I have all my people on the porch here, and I framed this really tightly, compact. I have stepped back and zoomed in so that it's flattened out a little bit, but here are my verticals, here's a horizontal here, horizontal, and here are all my people all contained on the porch. Nobody here, nobody here. And again, it gives stability to the image even when you have people there. Here are my guys here at the Lowry Zoo, and they jump around a lot, so you really have to have this set up ahead of time, and then you wait for them to kind of get in their position. So I have one guy here, one guy here, one guy here, snap, and I've got it. In about 2 seconds, they're all over the place. Now, this situation, we knew we were going to do a marketing image for Seaside. This was not going to be a portrait, because those people could have been shot in the studio. The idea was to have them within a framework showing Seaside. Knowing I had to deal with models, I did not want to fuss with them right as the sun was setting. So what I did the day before is I scouted this shot out ahead of time and marked it out, and I knew pretty much where I wanted my architectural framework to be. Then a little earlier in the day, when the light was streaming in, giving me some direction, we put them in there. Here's a little axis here, here's a little axis here. These two women are framed within this bit of architecture. These two people are framed within this bit of architecture. So even though you have people there, you are still very much aware of the architecture, and that's why the shot was taken to begin with. Not because of them, but because of the architecture at Seaside. Here at a Bacan restaurant, again, these are not controllable situations, but you can plan so that you don't have people wandering around. Here are the people, they're just within this little architectural framework here, and just within the framework here. So they serve as scale, but they're not important. I don't know who they are. I can't really see their faces, but they are within this framework. The architecture is still the dominant part of this image. This is at the Brightline station. This shows circulation. They're coming up here. It shows one central location for for these people. They show scale, but they are right within this little slot. They don't take away from the rest of the architecture. But if they were all over the place, that's a different situation. We're going to talk about that. Now, crowds. Obviously, you can't control them, and you must compose first, pre-visualize where you want them to be, and then you're going to have to wait for the right moment for them to sort of be in the right spots. Try to establish a single horizontal zone or a confined area for the people. Now, if you look at David Roberts' painting of you in Cairo in 1840, the architecture is dominant. Here are his people. they're in this one little band here, and then off in the distance, they're in this other little band. So he has confined his people to 2 horizontal bands, just like you would do with foliage in a landscape. They are in a confined space, and he has made his painting such that the architecture still dominates and the people are in their place. So in this situation, I've kept my architectural elements dominant. Here's the fountain, here's the building, and here are the people in here. Now I said, try not to have blurry images. Well, sometimes you can't avoid it. But if they're small, they're not going to, your eye isn't going to jump right to it. This is so strong. The trees are strong. The building is strong. And if you look back in here, yes, there are people back here sitting in the bar, but they are not getting in the way of what my main job is, which is to show the architecture. Here's another group. This is Giralda Plaza, Coral Gables, Florida. And you don't control my crowds in Miami, especially. And so what I did is I set this up. Basically, I set this up a couple of hours ahead of time, picked my spot, asked the waiter and waitress to not serve at that table. That's the one thing that I did. You may have to tip people sometime to have them do that. But I didn't want anybody at this table. I wanted all of this to be one form. I wanted all of this to be another form. And then I waited for all the tables to fill up. So I basically have a tripartite image. The people are there. They serve a purpose in this photograph. And this was taken for the landscape architects who did the tile setting on the floor. And it was really about the landscape, the use of the space with the people. I've controlled that by keeping them in one tight little area. Scale figures. They're not individuals, they're not crowds. They're often just a couple of people here and there, and that's a particularly difficult problem for an architectural photographer. So let's have a look at that. I have mentioned him before, that Canaletto is a good artist to study for placing people. And one of the reasons is that Canaletto, before he became a view painter, was a scenographic painter. And what he did was he painted backdrops for operas, for concerts, for ballet. So he was really good at depicting a cityscape with people, with streets and all. That was just like a big backdrop, like movie sets do. And when you look at Canaletto's paintings, you see these people in here, and I want to show you, there's somebody here. I want to show you how precise he is in dealing with his people. There is a big axis that goes on, starting here, going to the gondolier, over to these 2 people, in this way. These people are looking this way, these people are looking this way, and they are all taking you back to the architecture, which, like us, that's his primary purpose. He didn't care who these people are. They are there for scale, and in his case, they are there to give direction to the eye. And notice he gives you a way in without anybody there, and all of these people take you straight to the back. Here's another one. Now, there are a lot of people here. This is in St. Mark's. But what I want you to notice is, for your eye as the viewer, there are discrete pathways that take you back to the architecture. You start here, go this way, go this way. It's like navigating a cocktail party, but there's always a way to go in. You're never completely blocked from getting to the architecture. The placement of the people, even though this is a crowd scene and these people are here mainly for scale, they are very precisely placed. So this is a seaside town center, and like with landscape, I've given you a way in, and the people here are just supporting this idea of this public space where people are here, but your eye easily goes back to the architecture, which is really what I want you to see. That's what I'm showing. Here's another example. Here's your way in. Here's your way in. I've got people looking into the frame. You can come from this way if you want and get back to the architecture. In no way do I have people so close to the front of the frame that they're blocking you, that you have to look over them or around them to see the architecture. Now, with digital photography, of course, if there's somebody here that's not, how do we say this? If there's somebody that's not compositional, one or two keystrokes and they're gone. Same thing here. There's a lot more people here, but I give you, by saying I give you means I waited for this to happen. I give you a way in to the architecture. Here, here, not here. The trees are bringing you back here. And then I've done one little thing because I've got big vertical elements here. What I've done here is I've included a little bit of the top of this building, just like Hopper did. We looked at that earlier in the vertical video. Is if this weren't here, your eye would go right off the frame. And if this little piece isn't here, your eye maybe would come this way and go off frame. But I included this little bit of the building next door to it to do the exact same thing that Hopper's chimney over here did. Is you get in this way, you turn back this way, come in this way, and then turn back again. Now, individual scale figures will attract the eye, particularly if there's only one or two of them. Your viewer's eye will go right to it. And if you're not careful, your viewer's eye will go to that image and freeze on it. So what I've done here, here's my entrance in, here are the people. What I've given the viewer, I've moved my people over this way. I have my chair aimed into the frame because that's friendlier, but I have given your eye a little space to go through all the way to the horizon line. I did not want to miss that. So your eye comes this way, you see the framing, here's a diagonal leading you in, the bicycles lead you in, this bike leads you in. This bike is not in the middle, it's off to the side to give your eye a place to walk in, and then you're back here, and these two people, that's a little axis, a narrative axis, and then here you get all the way through to the end. So again, when you're dealing with people, know that your viewer's eye is going to fixate on the people, and you have to give your viewer a chance to see what you really want them to see, which is either the landscape or the horizon or the architecture. This figure is kind of close, but I have her doing something. I have her doing two things. One, there's a seating group here. And if she's not there, your eye doesn't see this as a discrete seating group. So she's here to kind of anchor this. The other thing I want you to do is I want you to know that there's more space back here. So your eye is going to go this way. It's going to go this way. The verticals hold you in, and she is, and I had her do that, she is leaning into the shot. She's not looking this way, she's not looking out, she's leaning into the shot, and that reinforces where I want your eye to go, which is, in the end, I want your eye to see this little area, to move down the space here, maybe pick that back up over here. So she's holding this down, and she's also reinforcing where I want to take your eye. Now, here's something as far as big monumental spaces. So this is the last thing to consider, is if you have big monumental spaces like this and you have people in your shot, the farther back they are, you can see them back here, the more monumental the space looks, because people are really small and they make the space look bigger. And if you look at some of Piranesi's engravings, if you were to scale down his figures to see how big they really were, they're not full adult size. And the reason that he did that was to make the monuments in Rome appear that much larger. So in summary, placement of people is critical for the overall composition, because as human beings, your viewers, your eye goes right to the people whether you want them to or not, and the architecture still has to be dominant. Compose first, get everything set, and then if it's a portrait, put your people within the architectural framework, or if you can't control them, pre-visualize where you want them to be, and then wait for them to walk in or ride their bike in, and then snap when they're just where they should be. And so the last thing, of course, keep in mind the overall dynamic of your composition. When you include people in your composition, make sure they are part of the overall direction that you want your viewer's eye to take when they look at your image. So if you like this video, hit the thumbs up button. And if you're new to the channel or you've seen a couple of videos, subscribe to the channel so you know when new videos come up. And you can see we have lots and lots of videos already there that will help you. And also, if you'd like to contribute to the site, check StephenBrookePhotography.com. Architectural Photography and Composition is my ebook. It's 360 pages, and every page has something that I think will help you. So again, thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.